I'm Jenny Boyett, and I'm really excited to be here with you today. Like I said, we're going to get close. You're going to hear my whole story, so buckle up. Here we go. If those of you may know my parents, David and Judy Chadwick, are members here, and so I got to meet Pastor Grace last year, and she said, I think you need to share your story at our women's retreat. So that's what brought me back down here to share. So I want to kind of back up a little bit. Just growing up, I had a wonderful childhood, wonderful family, although I had a stepbrother that we would argue and fight sometimes and all of that. But overall, he taught me some resilience in the world. But I never quite felt like I was pretty enough or athletic enough or smart enough or any of that, mainly because he told me that I wasn't growing up. However, I think part of that set me up for some of the story that I'm about to share, because when I went off to college, I went to Georgia Southern University, and, showing up, I did the sorority thing and felt great with girlfriends and had a lot of confidence in a lot of areas, but I didn't have a lot of confidence with dating or my looks or relationships, if you will. And so when this big man on campus, the real popular, attractive guy, started showing me some attention, I was pretty overwhelmed and felt pretty lucky, if you will. So that kind of begins my story. And so we're going to be talking about what happens when life unravels and how you can trust God and embrace healing, because although it started out great, it got rough. So during our dating, I always felt like I was the luckiest one because everybody else thought he was so cute and they would want to be with him. And so the fact that he chose me made me feel really special. And we did get married. So we had a few breakups and all of that, as some college kids do, but we got married in September of 1997, and I thought life was fantastic. We had a huge wedding in Atlanta. Thanks, Mom and Dad, for that. 9 bridesmaids and 9 groomsmen. And he's from South Georgia, and I was just south of Atlanta, and so we had all the parties and the showers and all the things. And I really felt like God had answered every prayer that I had ever had. I just thought this was my dream life that we were living. I was in sales and driving and working around Atlanta, and we started attending a pretty large church in Alpharetta, Georgia, and I wanted to start a family. We had talked about, let's start a family. And so I couldn't keep my job traveling, and he was traveling a lot, and so I had the opportunity to go work at our church, and I was like, what am I doing? I didn't see me as ever working at a church, but they had events, and I was able to do that. And as I started working there, we tried to start having a family, and that was kind of like a first big bump in the road, if you will. We had some fertility problems and weren't able to get pregnant, and I saw all my friends that were getting married and getting pregnant, and this was like the first big dip in my life map of, oh no, I'm not going to be able to get pregnant like everybody else. And so we started the in vitro process, which is expensive and time consuming, but I was on staff at this church, and God put some amazing people in my life that had walked that road, and so they came alongside me and walked that road, and everybody said, you're young, you're in your 20s, you're going to go through this, and you're going to get to, have a lot of eggs, and you're going to put your whole family in the freezer. Have you ever heard anybody say that? And I thought, yay, okay, my eggs are going to be 29 years old, and I'm going to have as many kids as I want, and we're going to put them in the freezer. And as we were going through this process, because it's expensive, and I was like, we're probably only going to get to do this one time, when they started retrieving my eggs and doing all of the things, all the numbers ended up not being what I wanted them to be. And I remember journaling, and this is what I love what Grace said the other day, is like, if you journal your life and all of the things that are hard and then the things that are good, it gives you such tangible things to go back to and see God's faithfulness in that. Even when it doesn't look like there is an answer prayer, you can go back and circle it and be like, oh my gosh, God, you were right there. And in my journal in 2003, I said, well, God, thanks for 2 pathetic eggs. So I said, I called them pathetic, because out of all the in vitro and the thousands of dollars, I had 2 viable eggs that they implanted. And so I thought, those are pathetic, and it's not going to work well. And I just think now of God sitting up there like, oh, ye of little faith. Because in November of 2003, I had triplets. So yes, one of those eggs split. So I have identical girls and a fraternal. And life was a journey. My pregnancy itself was quite up and down, and there are a lot of God moments in that. But having the triplets, it just was like, I can imagine what God was thinking, having known this was going to be my life, and me saying, 2 pathetic eggs. And so if there's something in your life right now that you think is pathetic, I'm telling you, God can do something pretty amazing with pathetic, right? Amen. So life was hard. My husband was traveling all the time. I'm working full time at our church, and I'm bringing the kids into the staff weekday program. And we really wanted to add to our family, but we weren't going to, we couldn't afford to go through in vitro again. So we were trying to decide, is it foster? Is it adoption? What is it? And then God miraculously opened my womb, and I just got pregnant. And I thought, oh my gosh, the first thing I did was call my fertility doctor, because I'm like, this doesn't happen. Like, how can I be pregnant? And I was. So God answered a huge prayer of mine just to be able to pee on a stick and see a positive sign, because that was not my journey in the beginning. And so God was even a part of those little details. So this is when I was pregnant. We were at a beach trip, and the girls were almost 6, and I'm pregnant, and life felt like it was pretty good. Although I was working at our church and I was in our marriage ministry, and there were times I felt super disconnected from my husband. I would watch these marriages that seemed perfect, and I just felt like we were not in sync all the time. I wouldn't even say it felt like roommates. It just felt like there was some major disconnection, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Working on staff, they had us take every type of personality and temperament assessment you can have. So I knew what number I was, what letters I was, what color I was, what animal I was. And I felt like I knew more about the people that I worked with than I knew my husband. And I would try to bring him in to those types of experiences, and there was just resistance. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But in November of 2009, we had my 4th daughter. And so now we have 4 daughters. We have 3 6-year-olds and a newborn. And again, we're going through life, but we had started hitting some hiccups and just some things that weren't adding up and weren't making sense. And I couldn't quite connect all the dots that were going on. And isn't this the way it is? From the outside, everybody thought we were like this perfect family. Oh, Jenny works at the church, and her husband's a traveling salesman. They have 4 beautiful daughters. They live in a beautiful house in the suburb of Atlanta. He drove the fine car. I had the minivan. It looked perfect. But inside, I knew there was something not right. There was just a disconnection, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I started to open up to some of the people that I worked with and tried to understand what was going on. And I thought maybe if Les got in one of the pastor's men's groups, that would start to break down and we would try to know him better and understand him. And these 2 verses just continued to stand out to me. God is our refuge and strength and ever present in trouble. I didn't know I was in trouble, really, but I just felt troubled. And then the Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. I didn't know what that meant, but that verse was so important to me because I kept trying to put my finger on what was going on. And it was when he was traveling out in California, and he called me one day, and I said, hey, how are you? I was always trying to connect. How are you doing? And he said, I'm not good. And I said, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you? And he says, I'm a 2. And I thought to myself, goodness, I'm wired to be overly optimistic and bright side, so I'm thinking, I don't think I've ever been a 2. I think I stay at 7 or 8, and so this very much concerned me. And it sent me down a path of really trying to investigate what's going on. He had a home office, and I really started to research and tried to understand where things were. And it was pretty eye-opening that there was a lot of things in his life that I didn't know what was going on, with some drinking, with spending money, and also with other women. So I said to him when he called, we need to talk. We need to sit down and talk about all of this stuff. And he didn't want to admit anything was true. And so he opted to move out and we took a 30-day sabbatical that was led by a pastor to try to figure out what was happening. And during that time, everybody was super encouraged because Les seemed super authentic and vulnerable and transparent, and we're going to get to the bottom of this. And so he started seeing a counselor, and the counselor was encouraged, and it started to peel back some of the layers of what he had been bottled up inside. However, when he moved back in the house, we were still back into this weird place, and I just couldn't put my finger on what was going on. One of the counselors said, I think you need just a full disclosure, share everything that needs to happen. And so I was like, oh, that sounds great. And I knew the Lord was going to allow me to handle it, whatever information was going to come my way, but I just really had no idea what information was going to come my way. And one of the counselors said, Jenny, or Les, I can understand if Jenny's constantly looking for things that aren't going well, and you've shared anything that needs to be shared, that's got to be really frustrating. And he said, but Jenny, I can understand that if the next shoe is always dropping and you're finding out more spending or drinking, you never feel like you get to the bottom of it. I could see why you keep questioning things. I can think of only one solution. And I was like, what's he going to say? And he said, I think you should take a polygraph test, Les. And I was like, oh, heck yeah. Let's go, right? This is going to be fantastic. Because I thought, this is a Christian counselor. Can we do this? And the first thing that Les said after the counselor said that was, you want me to take a test that isn't even admissible in court. And the Holy Spirit right then said, Jenny, buckle up. Buckle up. So just to kind of fast forward a little bit, Les moved out, and it was a really rough time. He did take a polygraph test, and it isn't like the movies. However, there was one focus that I could have, and I already knew that there was spending going on and that there was drinking, so I really wanted to hone in on the infidelity. And he passed that test. The idea was that he was going to fail that test and immediately go into treatment. However, he passed. So it put me on I don't know what's what. But because he was so frustrated that I had asked him to take the test and all that, he moved out. And his parents got him an apartment and furnished it, and so we just continued to kind of spiral. And he really just abandoned the family. He just moved out, moved on, and really even changed his direct deposit. There was no money coming in. It was like, what is even happening? And I was on my way in October of 2012 to lead a marriage retreat for my church position. Isn't this how God works? I'm in charge of the marriage retreat. I wasn't the one speaking necessarily, but I was the one that was in charge of all the logistics. And the Holy Spirit just prompted me to call him on my way because I had been advised by my advisory board to file for divorce because he was continuing to spend and it was just becoming really difficult. And so I did. And he had gotten the papers the day before and I had heard nothing. And I called him and I just said, Les, what is going on? I just felt like if we had been together almost 20 years at that point, and I said to him, gosh, if I had lost my mind and I was spiraling out of control, I would hope that you would love me enough to want to shake me. So can you tell me what's happening? And he said, Jenny, if you really knew me, you wouldn't want me. I thought, oh my goodness. And he read me this poem that a counselor had read him. And it was pretty pivotal in our relationship. It's called 5 Chapters. I don't know if you've heard it, but it's very short. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in this same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall. It's a habit. But my eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5, I walk down another street. He was telling me this on the phone, and I didn't know if I should be hopeful, okay, you're going to choose to go into treatment and to figure this out, and you're going to then come back and we're going to reconcile our family, or if he was telling me he's choosing to walk down another street to pursue another life, to pursue another woman or family or direction. I didn't know. But as God is always faithful, over the next few days, things just started to unroll because God was working on Les. And he started to become a little bit more transparent with the counselor and a good friend that was walking with him in some of the recovery period. And it was his boss that finally called me and said, "Hey, Jenny, something isn't adding up here." And we found out that he was in relationship with 2 women in his office. So his boss gave him an ultimatum, and Les ended up in treatment. It was a 90-day treatment program that worked with men that struggled with addictions, and Les's was alcohol, substance abuse, money, spending, and women. And I was brokenhearted. At this point, I have 3 8-year-olds and a 2-year-old, and it was literally 3 weeks before Christmas. So he goes into treatment, and at this point, I didn't know if my marriage could be saved, but I knew that I needed to fight for the father of my children. So that's what I did. I did whatever I could, and when you're in the middle of a storm like this, God shows up. He showed up through my community, through counselors, through pastors. He showed up through a ministry that knew my story, and they showed up to wrap presents and help me buy presents for all my girls so Christmas would go off without a hitch. I had an incredible parents and family members that rallied around me during that time. I don't know if they were what they really thought they should pray for, reconciliation or not. Like, this was a mess. But Jesus always shows up in the middle of this. He always shows up. And he was my rock. When you have nowhere else to look, you can either choose to look at the negative and focus on that, or you can look up and you can look at Jesus. I remember my mom, it was pretty crazy at this point. She may not like that I share this, but at one point she just said, "Hey, Jen, let's just have a glass of wine. Like, you need a break. Let's just have a glass of wine." And I remember looking at her thinking, if I start drinking, I may not stop. So I don't know if that's the best solution, right? But I needed a break. I needed something. I had a counselor at that moment that basically said, "Hey, you set the buzzer for 20 minutes and you can have it out with Jesus and you can cry or whatever, but when that buzzer goes off, you've got 4 girls to raise, and we're gonna pick up the boots and we're gonna keep marching." And that's what I would do. But it was Jesus carrying me through all of that. Because a pastor had said to me, "Hey, Jenny, what story do you want to tell? What story? Do I want to tell the negative story of everything going wrong, or do I want to tell the story of how God is meeting me in the middle of the storm? Did the story I want to be, was it going to be bitter and angry that this was happening right at Christmas? Or was it going to be focusing on, gosh, I have so many people that love me, and the treatment facility had a place and they got less right on in. You could choose what to focus on, and what story did I want to tell? I wanted to tell a story that was going to glorify God the best. Even though, if I'm really honest, I was confused. I was mad at God. I didn't understand. But I knew I needed to trust him. And God began to birth forgiveness in my heart for Les. During some of his treatment, he shared some of the disclosure that was heartbreaking. My best friend from college, my maid of honor in my wedding, was one of the women he was unfaithful with. It was devastating. But God somehow allowed me to start to forgive Les. I still didn't know if we were going to reconcile, or if that was even possible, but I knew that I could forgive him. And some of you out there in this audience, you might be like me, where you're wired a little bit more towards forgiveness. And you may be like one of my very dear friends who is not wired towards forgiveness. In fact, when that happens, instead of thinking of forgiving, she holds a grudge. She actually pets that grudge every day, okay? But luckily for me, God pursued me and began to bring people into my life, and counselors and books and healing, so that I could begin to open my heart up to forgiveness, just as Les was meeting Jesus in treatment. So take a look at this video of our story.
My name is Les Boyett. I grew up in rural Georgia, a little small town, a very influential family in the community in regards to, the career status in the school system, in our church. Very attractive family, beautiful home, dad a very successful businessman, mom very successful in her career. We had it all. But I always compare our family to like a home. Imagine a beautifully manicured lawn, beautifully white painted house. Always looked pretty on the outside, but if you could ever get in, you wouldn't see much, not much substance at all. Growing up as a kid, I was very insecure, especially about my appearance. And I think the reason why I was so insecure is because it was so important to look your best. I was very popular. I was Mr. Freshman, Mr. Sophomore, Mr. Junior, most popular my senior year. Really good athlete, really good student, had a really cool car. During those years, though, I would make some bad decisions and get in trouble, sometimes with the law. And due to the status of who my dad was and my mom were, I was able to get out of trouble. If I only would have had a consequence that maybe could have deterred me, because that's the years where the actual, I'd say, my addictive behaviors began. I was scared to death about starting college, and I was going from a big fish in a really tiny little water hole to a little nobody in a big ocean. But then that's when I kind of made another promise. I'm going to be known. From promiscuity to a lot of one-night stands, and it was all about hooking up. I was probably more terrified of pregnancy or some sort of STD. I would secretly go to the infirmary and get tests all the time, and that's the way I lived. And so it was kind of like the morning after a person's hungover. Oh Lord, I promise I'll never drink again. Well, it was God, I promise I'll never have sex again. And that went on and on and on, and then carried that even into my sophomore year, until I actually met Jenny. Jenny was, I can't put a finger on how she was just different. It's just something about her that night just struck me in the heart. And being someone who was so insecure, and seeing her genuineness really lit me up. It actually even gave me some hope that, man, if she can be genuine, maybe I can be genuine. When Jenny and I became exclusive, I was still smitten, and certainly infatuated with her, and in deep down already was falling in love. So I'd say for about 6 to 8 months when we first started dating, I was an honest guy in terms of not cheating on her, but that didn't last long. Tell a lie long enough, eventually everyone will believe it, and that's exactly what I did. Is I would deny and deny and deny. The first year, I was straight up, and then I finally got the opportunity to get a sales position and travel. And then when traveling came, there was no one to hold me accountable. And after about 8 months of traveling is when it happened for the first time, which was probably a year or so after we got married. And then that's when it really got out of control. The double life was my way of life. I would continue this cycle, and I did that all the way up until our girls were born. And then being the fact that they were girls, I was like, these other ladies are someone else's, daughter. I can't do this anymore. And so I addiction swapped. I didn't really get help or anything. I just went straight to alcohol. It took about 3 years for everyone to start noticing you got a problem, because it kind of started off slow. Jenny started asking a lot of questions. Did you drink today? Have you much? I'm getting concerned. I was even, going to bed with a drink next to my nightstand. And so all that shame was right there on me. I was just overcome and drowning in it. And I needed to get out. Well, I didn't want to cheat. I knew I couldn't drink, because it's hard to hide drinking, because there's hangovers and you smell like it. I didn't get help. I just quit drinking and didn't know what to do. And I struggled for about 4 or 5 days, and then found my new addiction, which was spending. Well, let me go buy a nice shirt. Let me go buy a nice watch. Let me go buy this. And that was easy to hide. I managed the finances. Cashed out several 401ks and IRAs. I went through the entire equity of our home. Maxed out so many credit cards. What got me caught was me. I was in California on a business trip, and Jenny called me, and she could tell something was wrong. And I wanted to commit suicide. That's probably the first time I ever even contemplated it. And because I had no more money. But something about that phone call made her decide to look. And then when I came home the next night, there was several inches of paper sitting there, and I knew I was busted. A couple guys from church came and met with us. We shared everything with them, and I had to hand over all credit cards. I had to hand over every debit cards, everything. She gave me an option to either, get help, or this place called Hope Quest, or move out. I said, yeah, I'll do Hope Quest. We told the kids I'm going to Hope Quest, and then I read the application. I pretty much said, hell no, I'm not going. And so I moved out, and really, I don't even want to use the word moved out. Looking back, it was true abandonment. I abandoned them as a husband, as a father, as a man. And so then I got to the bottom of the funnel where it runs out fast, and started making horrendous decisions. Now I'm back with women, and I'm back to drinking. And it's just a full-fledged downfall. The shame was literally eating me from the inside out. And I was terrified of getting help, because deep down inside, I think I was afraid, what if it don't work? Am I savable? Jenny finally filed for divorce. I thought, great, I don't have to really worry about telling the truth now. She's going to leave me anyway. I don't have to expose my shame, and I can keep living this life. But I decided to call a counselor. He wanted me to do a disclosure. I called him up and told him I was sorry for what I had done, and I said I really would like to do this disclosure thing. The counselor was in, all right, great, now let's go get you some help. And I even kind of, okay, let's do that, we'll do that. And then that's when I left there. I had no intention of getting any help. I will tell everybody this day, I was taking the Hope Quest. I did not go. I got dropped off by my father. I was angry, I was furious, probably more at others and even myself. How did I lose control with this? I was doing so well hiding this. What I didn't know is that the next 4 days I couldn't talk to anybody. And when you can't speak or talk to anybody and you're left to your own thoughts and there are no devices to medicate with, wow. And I was so numb, and my soul was as solid as a piece of steel. All I knew at that time is but Jesus loved me. And he began to work on me. I was seeing these other guys who were 9 weeks ahead of me, 10 weeks ahead of me, that were these new men, because I heard their stories of the way they used to be. And so this quest began to be free from everything. And so when it came time for me to leave Hope Quest, I was restored with God. I had earned a little bit of trust back with Jenny to be able to move into the basement, which is exactly what I did. Jenny paused on the divorce, even though the papers were actually all signed. And we slowly walked back towards one another. And through that 3-year process, there was zero sexual contact of any kind. I learned what it was like to love unconditionally, because I remember the night Jesus met me. It had nothing to do with what I had done. It was really about what he had done. After coming out of Hope Quest, and I knew I could not go back to a job traveling. A wonderful opportunity came along. That was a chance for me to start over with very little stress. And I don't mind any longer not wearing a suit. I don't mind getting on a plane. I don't mind saying, hey, I'm this vice president. I'm Les that works for a tree company. It's just me and the machine and no one else except for God, and it's just a peaceful avenue for me. Recovery, sometimes I believe, could even last a lifetime. But through continued counseling and getting in the right environments actually helped me eventually expose the real root of why I did, not to excuse what I did, but why I did what I did. And that restoration, I believe, is the recovery. We still face hurdles. We still face a lot of the consequences that I've left behind, but we have learned in a healthy way, with the Lord, how to face them and deal with them. So after a lot of hard work, on December 19th, we had a recommitment ceremony, just with a few people, with our girls and a few people who'd walked with us through that journey. Our true marriage finally began. So for the first time in our lives now, it's nice to know that we actually have normal marriage problems, and instead of what we had. And I'm so grateful for those who would fight when I wouldn't fight, and then I am so grateful he showed up to help me fight. You're gonna have hard days. You're gonna have days where you're gonna feel there's no hope. But as long as you got breath, there's hope. I'm here today with a grateful heart, and and restored and free, and and just wondering what God's got next.
That's not the end of the story, is it? But I thought it was. I thought, okay, I can connect dot A to B to C, and our mess becomes our ministry, and this is what it's going to be. It's going to be all about forgiveness, and we started doing things in recovery and speaking to groups and walking with couples experiencing stuff, and so I thought, okay, God, I wanted to connect all the dots, right, to know exactly why all that had to happen. One of the quotes that I love from Desmond Tutu from the book of Forgiving is, "We are not responsible for what breaks us, but we can be responsible for what puts us back together again." So I thought, okay, God, you are making up for the years the locusts had eaten, and we are now using this as ministry. So this all happened in 2012, 2013. We renewed our vows December of 2015. And December of 2016, my pastor at a large megachurch in Atlanta asked if I would speak to a couple thousand people, some staff and some key volunteers, and share my story and do a Christmas devotion. So I stood up on stage and I shared, and Les was sitting right in front next to our pastor, next to the people that had walked with us through this story, and I literally talked about my mess being my ministry, and that it really isn't that Les and I are reconciled. That is a bow on my story, but Jesus is the bow. And I need to focus on Jesus. However, I was really grateful that my bow looked nice and my family was back together, and I felt like we were doing ministry and serving the Lord in that way. Unfortunately, not long after, 6 months to be exact, Les relapsed. And I was devastated. I thought I just was on stage. Now Les is out at bars drinking with women in our town, and people that sat in the audience are seeing it. I don't know what to do. I feel like a fraud. What if they see this and then they don't know what to say? So I went to my pastor and I shared, and they were so gracious, because in the middle of our storm, Jesus still shows up. He sends people to walk with us, to comfort us, to guide us, and I had all of those same people doing that. But I couldn't quite understand, why? Why, God? Why? Because we are preaching your good name. Our story has gone so public. Now we are standing on stages praising you and your glory for this redemption and reconciliation. You're getting the credit. Why would you just take the rug out from under us? I didn't understand. I saw this post. I'm going to read it to you. Oh, I had it up, and of course it went off, but I'll pull it up real quick. This is a biosphere, if anybody knows what that is. I had no idea, but it's a counseling page that I followed, and I literally just saw this a few days ago, and it summarizes how I was feeling, but it also gave me so much hope that I wanted to share it with you. This is a wild experiment that took place in Arizona in the desert in the early 90s. It's called the Biosphere 2. It looks kind of 90s-ish, doesn't it? But for 2 years, scientists had locked themselves in this artificial environment in Oracle, Arizona. The mission was to serve as a center for research, outreach, and learning about Earth and its living systems. To this day, it is the largest closed system ever created. Inside their self-sustained community, they created a number of mini environments, including a desert, a rainforest, and even an ocean. Now, the trees inside the Biosphere 2 grew rapidly, more rapidly than they did outside of the dome. But interestingly, they also fell over before ever reaching maturity. After looking at the root system and the outer layers of bark, the scientists came to realize they were missing one crucial element: wind. No wind meant no resistance. No resistance meant no strength. Over time, the effects of their windless environment became apparent. Without the stress of wind to strengthen the roots and the wood, the tree would grow weak and could not hold up its own weight. If we're honest, a lot of us want to live in a biosphere kind of life, don't we? I did. I had been through that storm, and now it was over, and I wanted the easy sailing. I wanted to be sheltered and protected from future hardship, struggle, or pain. I get it. That's how I was, honestly. But something happens to us when we do. Resistance doesn't just challenge us, it changes us. In Scripture, the imagery of trees is often tied to spiritual growth and endurance. Psalm 1:3 describes the righteous as a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither. Trees grow strong not by avoiding the storm, but by weathering it. Jesus never promised us a storm-free life. He promised us a storm-proof one. What if the very thing we're trying to escape is the thing that God is using to shape us? Ease is a bad teacher. The things that make life easier rarely make us stronger. I wonder if it's in the storms that God does his best work, because when the winds blow strongest, our roots grow deepest. And that will ultimately lead to the life that we're meant for. Without the winds of life, we may grow fast, but we won't grow strong. I think God is less interested in protecting us from struggles and more interested in shaping us through them. What if instead of asking God to remove the struggle, we ask him to use it, to make us resilient, to make us strong, and to make us whole? This was my season of that, of questioning God and saying, is this what it is? Is this the wind again? Hoping you were going to restore less. I literally sat him down when he relapsed. We were on a family vacation, and it was my mom that found out he had started drinking again and had to tell me. I brought the troops back together again, the pastors, the counselors, and we did the intervention. I showed him the video you just watched and begged him to get back into recovery. He said no. He had no interest in walking the road of recovery again, and he moved out. He lost a couple jobs, and it was an employer that caught him drinking on the job that eventually he did go to treatment in November of 2017. And I was still holding on hope. God, you are going to restore this. You would not have taken me through all of this to now let it fall apart. No. I was resistant. And a counselor had said to me, Jenny, when are you going to receive the assignment? It isn't the outcome, it's the assignment. I was fighting it being true. I was fighting it so badly. But what I needed to do was to get back to the basics and to go back to Jesus and realize Jesus has all of this. I don't know what it is, but Jesus had it. And I had heard relapse is part of recovery. Okay, relapses were part of recovery. This will just be part of our story. Giddy up. But what I also knew is it had 3 different subparts. It can be a lapse, it can be a relapse, or it can be a collapse. Les had collapsed, and there was nothing I could do about it. He was back to spending money, seeing women, and drinking, right in front of everybody we knew, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. I was still holding on so tightly because I wanted the story. I had to open my hands, and I still am. I sit here before you, or stand here before you today, still not knowing exactly what the end of the story is. I don't have a earth-like bow on my story, but I do have a Jesus bow on it. And so it continued to spiral out of control. I'm on staff at a church. I asked my pastor if I could go back and at least tell everybody to pray for Les, and if they saw him, I didn't want it to be uncomfortable. And it was finally that pastor that sat me down and he said, Jenny, it's time. It's no longer safe for you and the girls to be in this. And if Les gets his life back together, I will remarry you. But it's time. So I called up the attorney that I'd called once before, and it was on hold. The divorce was on hold. And so she went and did her thing, and then she called me back. She goes, you're never going to believe this. Usually when it's on hold and it just, after so many years, it just poofs away. She goes, it's still in the system, and we have 30 days to execute this. So I moved forward. I wrote a letter to Les basically saying, if at any moment when you get this, you decide you want to get into treatment and get into recovery, and you don't want to divorce and move forward, I am in. Sent it. He wasn't in. He signed the papers. April of 2018, my divorce was final. I couldn't believe it. I literally couldn't believe it. I couldn't understand what God was doing. But I knew he was with me and he was for me and he had brought so many people along, but I wanted to have a story to tell that glorified him, and right now I just was so confused. It didn't feel good, even though I knew that God works all things together for good. And what I entered into there for probably the next 5 years was grief. And I'm sure that's not new to anybody here. But grief, C.S. Lewis says, is how we come to terms not only with the hardship we have endured, but also with what could have been if life had taken a different course. We often grieve as much for what might have been as for what was. I was stuck in grief. I just couldn't believe it. I kept negotiating, like one of the stages of grief is, but I needed to just accept the assignment. This is what I'm walking. How can I honor God and be a single mom and do all of this? Because I felt more like a widow than a single parent because he was spiraling out of control. I had all my girls full time. He financially was in and out of work. I didn't know how it worked. It truly is only of Jesus, an incredible family that made all the pieces somehow fit together. I still can't go back and figure it out. But I was like, now what? Now what? Can I even stay employed at my church? I'm a divorced woman with 4 kids. Of course I could stay employed. But I wanted to know, what did God want from me? How could I honor him? I was so confused. Again, he's just said back to the basics, which is Jesus. Look for Jesus. And what I realized then is that I had to keep my forgiveness current. I had forgiven less. It is only of Jesus that mended my broken heart and allowed me to reconcile with him, to be intimate with him, to trust him fully again. It is true. I tell people that and they're like, I don't get it. And I'm like, I don't get it either. I honestly do not get it. But Jesus showed up and was able to do that. And if he could do that, he could show up for me now. That's why I love journaling, because like I said, I can go back and look at the pathetic eggs, and now I can look back at I'll never trust less again, and then I did, and it's like, oh my gosh, you're blowing my brain. So it's back to the basics of Jesus. And it's back to the question my counselor had asked me a long time ago is, what story do I want to tell? What is this going to look like? I had gone through divorce care at my church, and I met with several women, and they're all suburban Alpharetta-like women, and they were lovely, but their situations was different. They had big checks and alimony and shared custody, and so every other Saturday night, they wanted to go to a nice dinner. I couldn't do that. I couldn't afford that. I had my kids full time. But they also wanted to sit in negative bond about all the bad of their ex-husbands. And I just felt icky. I didn't want that to be my story. I wanted to try to find some good. God, how can you use me? You can use me however you want. And I had to go back to my life verse, and I had to hold on to it so tightly. And I still to this day do, because things haven't been easy sailing just because I've committed to constantly following Jesus. He never promises it easy, right? But it's a Jeremiah 29:11 verse. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. I want that. But I needed to be the best version of me in order to provide that for my girls and to trust that of Jesus. And so continuing counseling and reading books and being part of small groups and doing whatever I could to stay in tune with Jesus. That's when the healing started to come. And I didn't know it was really healing. I just could slightly find myself responding and reacting to things a little bit differently and better. One of my counselors early on had said, hold a picture of Les at 8 years old and have it with you. Because when you look at that picture, you will be able to find compassion and realize he never wanted to grow up to be the man he is today. It's given me the ability to be able to pray for Les all the time. Because we're all one decision away from either destruction or God's destiny, right? We could all screw up our lives right now if we wanted to. But we're also one decision away to choosing a different path. And what I realized is, although I was able to fully forgive Les, I think the problem was Les was never fully be able to forgive himself. And the shame just kept there. And that's what has caused him now, even 7 years later, to continuously spiral out of control. So I don't know if you're someone in here that maybe you need to think about forgiving somebody, or maybe you need to forgive yourself. But it is a powerful way to begin the healing process. Because like Grace talked about that first night, what do you got to hack up? Get it out. The enemy wants to keep us stuck in these things, but Jesus wants to free us of them. I saw this the other day, and I absolutely love it, and I have to read it again, but it's a page that I follow, and it is so true, because this is a picture. I don't know if any of you might recognize this, but this is driving across Kansas. Any of you from Kansas or have driven that road before? I know before I die I want to make this journey, but it says, what does it look like to heal? Well, it looks a lot like driving through Kansas. If you've ever driven east to west across Kansas, you know that you've never seen anything flatter. It's incredible. Just flatness all around you. And it's also sameness all around you. You wonder if you are making any progress at all. What you don't realize is as you are traveling east to west across Kansas is that although everything looks flat, like nothing is changing, you are actually slowly rising in elevation. You are actually raising thousands of feet in elevation, and when you get to that western border of Kansas, you have gone from 679 feet of elevation to 4,039 feet of elevation. And standing proud and majestic right in front of you like a painted canvas are the Rockies. Little did you know that amidst all the flatness and sameness and mundaneness, you were rising. You were mysteriously rising. That's what it looks like to heal. You keep doing all the things, going to the therapy, reading the books, setting the boundaries, learning to identify your feelings, learning to speak your needs, relearning what it means to trust someone, and one morning you wake up and life looks different. It feels different. Unbeknownst to you, in the midst of that great, repetitive, hard work you were doing to heal, God was also mysteriously helping you rise. Work like it depends on it, pray like it depends on God, and keep going, friends, because healing is possible. That spoke to me because when I look at my girls now, they're 21, the triplets are, and my youngest is 15, and we look great, right? That was our Christmas card. I mean, everything looks good, but it's a process. We are healing. We will be healing until we are healed at home with Jesus in heaven. My girls still go through hardships because they have an absent father. There's been eating disorder, mental illness. There's been a lot of heartache. There's been even heartache for me. I took 5 years and I didn't date at all. I was focused on my girls because I needed to be on that drive of slowly rising. And then I decided, okay, now I think I'm ready to date. And it went terrible, okay? It was a train wreck. But God has redeemed that, and He healed my heart even a little bit more. Things that were buried and tucked away, it took me putting myself back out there, because what I've learned is you get hurt in relationship and you heal in relationship. And now God has brought a wonderful, godly man into my life, and I don't know what the future holds, but I can see redemptive things happening over and over again as I allow God to continue to mend my broken heart. So for you, I don't know what you're going through. I don't know if it's physical, emotional, but I do know that Jesus wants to be there for you. And He is okay and is big enough for you to be really mad at Him. He can take it because He does work all things together for good. And so if I wrote a book, my title would be To Be Continued. Because I don't know what God's doing, but I trust that He does know what He's doing. And all I have to do is stay steadfast with Him and for Him and take the next step that He puts in front of me. So let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, I thank You for Pastor Grace and her heart for women and for this church. Father, I thank You for the women in this breakout, Lord. I pray that You majestically whisper whatever it is that You would want them to take away from this, Father. It is not me, it is You. I give You all the glory. And Father, I can truly say I'm thankful for my story. You have been there the whole way. You have allowed me to sit across from women that needed someone to say, I understand, me too. And had I not walked this road, I would not be able to do that. So Father, however You want to use the women in this room, I pray that You give them the light so they can see their next path. And Father, for the woman in here that you've just nudged her, it's time to forgive. Father, that doesn't mean she forgets. I pray that she can lean into you, Jesus, and allow her heart to be healed by you. And if there's a lady in here that needs to forgive herself, Father, I pray that you meet her when she kneels, because you have taken it all on the cross, Father. Thank you for this day and this time, and for every single woman here. We love you and we praise you.